Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Duplantis, and you're watching It's Your Health. Tonight, my guest is Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne, and we're talking about health issues in the state of Louisiana. First, I've got a few points I want to bring out about you, Lieutenant Governor. You attended Baton Rouge High School. Of course, you went to LSU and got a degree in journalism. A BA in journalism in '76. You got your law degree in 1979. You were outstanding young attorney in Louisiana by the Louisiana Bar Association, recognized as outstanding young man in Louisiana by the JCs. Quite a few accolades in your service career. During your legislative service, you chaired the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee. This oversaw the ethics and election laws. You authored and passed some of Louisiana's most significant progressive legislation during this period of time. And one is regarded to the motion picture tax credit laws, which brought California and Hollywood to Louisiana.
It really has.
LA South.
You know, we made more feature films filmed in Louisiana last year than any place in North America. And it's because we have a very aggressive and ambitious and generous tax credit program. Legislature scaled it back a little bit during this current session and made some important changes. It really was too generous. They made some changes I think they shouldn't have made, and we'll probably be revisiting that shortly after the first of the year to make certain we can stay competitive, because it's a very, very competitive industry, and Hollywood loves Louisiana. They love to come down here. They love the friendliness and the ambiance and the food and everything else, but they like that tax credit more than anything, and they want to make sure that it stays in place. But it's really opened the door for young people to come back to Louisiana and young people to come to Louisiana, opened a creative door that is really symbolic of what we're about as Louisianians.
I think that's awesome, and it's a great advertising for Louisiana as such, to bring people to our state to visit for tourism, which you have a lot to do with, of course. You know, you were very active early on in the MDA work with the Jerry Lewis organization. You were on the board of directors, the national board of directors for MDA, and you've worked with them for 30 years. You know,
yeah.
and I'm reading this long and very extensive CV of yours, that all this work that you've done, and how busy you've been in giving your time and service to others.
Well, I started out as a volunteer in the community, which I think is a great foundation for getting into public life and offering yourself for political office. And I was very fortunate when I was at LSU to get involved with MDA, and we had a week-long 24/7 flag football game on the parade ground at LSU, and raised an awful lot of money, and that was my introduction to MDA nationally. And I wound up being the national youth chairman for the organization, so I got to travel all around the country raising money and encouraging young people to raise money to fight neuromuscular disease, and have just been with the organization ever since.
That's tremendous, your contribution to that worthy organization. You know, you've created a new brand for the state. You know, your job and for the tourism aspect, and it's called Pick Your Passion. And this resulted in a record-breaking visitation in 2013. The Louisiana Office of Tourism is being named by one of the top tourism offices in the Southeast. You reestablished the Louisiana Book Festival here in the state. In 2012, you oversaw the state bicentennial celebration. 2015, you received the National Spirit of 1812 Award given by the United States Daughters of 1812. And you received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. This work was to raise awareness and combat domestic abuse in Louisiana. You also received the Red Pelican Award for East Baton Rouge Parish Republican Women, and were recognized for excellence in sales and marketing by the Sales and Marketing Executive of Greater Baton Rouge. In 2013, Louisiana Tourism Champion. You were named Louisiana Tourist Champion by the Louisiana Travel Promotion Association. All these were just tremendous contributions that you've made to the state, bringing more people to Louisiana and the awareness of the tourism dollars to help the state of Louisiana. As Secretary of State, you went on to champion and increase early voting opportunities, and you helped to win legislative approval for a pay raise for those who were the polling commissioners. And also the challenges of post-Katrina and the election and the debacle of all that.
I don't want to stop you. You're on a roll.
You know, yeah.
But I do want to tell you. You go back to, you mentioned the Pick Your Passion thing right off the top, and
yeah.
that was a new brand we created for Louisiana, which I thought needed an identity. We have "Don't Mess with Texas" and "Virginia's for Lovers," these slogans that are so well known and identified with the state, and we didn't have one, and we needed one. And that Pick Your Passion brand has really caught on, and people are starting to recognize it around the country and identifying it with Louisiana. We just found out literally today. We have been named the best print advertising campaign in America of any tourism organization in the country for our branding message about Pick Your Passion, and primarily centered around food in this past year. So we've got a great staff in the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and a great agency that works with us to be able to put that messaging together.
Well, you know, I read your CV. It looks like everything that you do, you tackle with great passion, with great aggressiveness, and you're very successful, and that's great for us as a state. You know, this show's about health, and try to educate the people about health and good nutrition and awareness of what they can do to take control of their health. And so, in your run for governor of the state of Louisiana, I've got a couple of questions for you. You know, we all have had experiences in the healthcare industry, you know, but when a public official becomes ill or has a health issue, it's a matter of public awareness, and it's on public record, and you make the front pages. And you've had some well-publicized issues. Would you care to share that with us?
You know, I was healthy, never had any health problems at all the way through being about 50 years old, or a couple of years older than that. In 2007, in August of 2007, I was in a real serious car accident. I was one of those phantom drivers pulled over in front of me and forced me to make an emergency move to the right lane, and the person coming in the right lane behind me, thinking they got clear ahead, clipped me on the back like the police flip cars, and I went into a spin. It was like the Wizard of Oz. All I remember is that I was spinning like the house on the Wizard of Oz, and I wound up crashing kind of head first into a culvert at the I-10-12 split. And I broke my back, my lower part of my back, and broke my pelvis. So I was laid up for a while, and this was in the midst of a re-election campaign for Secretary of State. In fact, I never left Baton Rouge to campaign that year. I did better than I've ever done, which is a lesson. Maybe I just ought to stay home and not travel the state. But it was a rude awakening. I'd been very involved in athletic and played a lot of basketball, ran a lot, and that kind of changed my lifestyle to some extent. I still exercise a lot and keep in great shape. I'm very lucky there was nothing neurological. It was all orthopedic, and
right.
Two great doctors put me back together. And then a few years later, in the midst of my campaign for lieutenant governor, I learned that I had prostate cancer, and I really had not. It came out of the blue. I had nothing, no symptoms, nothing that indicated any problem. I'd always had a great PSA level, and all of a sudden I don't. So I weighed my options and talked to my doctor, who was about the same age that I was at the time, and he said if it was me, I'd get my prostate out. And as you know, there are many ways you can treat prostate cancer now, and the option for me was robotic surgical removal of the prostate, and had a successful operation here in Louisiana, and have recovered very well, and a good result. But it certainly was a wake-up call for me, never having had those kind of problems before. And I've become kind of a counselor to some other people, because, as you said, it was literally front page news when I announced after my surgery what had happened, and I needed a little week or two to recover. But I've talked to a lot of men who are my age, some even younger than I, and some older, who are facing this challenge, and talked to them quite openly about the symptoms going in, if there are any, and about the procedure itself, and about the recovery afterwards, and the need to make sure you have early testing. This is one of those cancers that early detection is key. And unfortunately, I was early enough in the process that detected. It was not fast moving, and everything worked out great. But I've spent a lot of time, particularly talking to men's groups, making speeches, and always saying, if you guys haven't had your PSA checked, and you're over 40 or you're 50, you need to have it done.
Correct. Men don't like to go to doctors.
Oh no, they don't.
Traditionally.
They don't like what happens in a urologist's office very much either. But it's a necessary test that is performed, and it really is something we all should do.
It's the gold standard.
Yep.
That test that nobody likes to have, it's the gold standard. We call it in medicine the gold standard. And the PSA is sometimes can be everywhere, and it's not the predictor, and that exam is crucial.
Well, and I just would mention, because that exam we're talking about did not suggest anything out of the ordinary.
Really?
It was only when the PSA level was a bit elevated and did not come down after a bout with antibiotics that decided, maybe I better take a second look and talk to a urologist. This was at a regular physical, and that's when my urologist, my friend, in his exam said, we ought to biopsy this. This doesn't look exactly right, and so that's what happened.
Correct. And you're well now. You're doing fine.
Doing great.
That's terrific. Yeah, I'm happy for you. What does the current Louisiana healthcare system get right or get wrong? At this time.
Well, healthcare all across America is going through the same question, the same challenge, and it's being driven by a lot of the discussion about the ACA and how it's being implemented and what it's doing to change the face of healthcare. I think one of the things we've gotten right in Louisiana recently is the conversion from the charity hospital system to this public-private partnership that's been created. There are a lot of bumps on the way that we're having to deal with, and they're going to be big challenges for me, I hope, in January. But conceptually, to move away from that system and to go to this public-private partnership, I think is a right move for Louisiana. We have a lot of indigent patients in Louisiana. We have a high Medicaid population. We have one of the highest poverty rates in America. We're on the top of a lot of the bad lists we don't want to be on, and we can do a much better job with our healthcare delivery system. And I think it's going to start with that conversion that's underway.
I know it caused quite a disruption in some of the medical training programs for residents. It caused a lot of people to scramble in their job and in their professional careers. A lot of people lost jobs during that period of time in all of our state hospitals, state-funded hospitals, and so I'm glad that the private sector hospitals have kind of partnershiped up with them, and that it's a successful system. It's a running system back up again for us in the state of Louisiana.
Well, I think it's successful, but I think the jury is still out on the long-term positive benefits we're going to realize, because it's still in its infancy.
Still being tweaked.
And it is being tweaked, and it's going to be tweaked considerably with some questions arising about the budgets and the contracts that are in place that the state's going to be on the hook for. And in Shreveport, as you know, there's a big mess in Shreveport right now, and we got to make sure that hospital in Shreveport and that medical school in Shreveport work things out, because we need that medical school in Shreveport, a great medical school just like we have in New Orleans, and we need to make sure they both survive and flourish.
Right, I agree. We had a shooting here about 3 weeks ago in the Grand Theater in Lafayette last month. Shocked everybody. But we had a sucker punch, I think Lafayette did, because this person wasn't from our community, wasn't from our state even. He was a transit from another state, just passing through, comes in and goes into a theater here in Lafayette, picks it out randomly, and shoots 2 people. I mean, leads me to the mental health issue. Now, I know we rank pretty low.
We do.
In funding for mental health issues and treatment. We rank 46 in the country. That's almost, last. We're not that far from being last. We're at the bottom of the list. Can you talk about that? And the gun rights and what should be done to prevent these shootings?
Yeah, it's something I've been talking about really since early this year in the campaign, that the shortage of mental health focus in Louisiana, the absence of mental health focus in Louisiana, that's a real problem. And unfortunately, it's manifested itself now with these shootings and these multiple traumas we've sustained in Louisiana as of late. The Lafayette shooting, the Shreveport policeman who was killed, the Lake Charles state trooper who was killed, and then the Sunset just yesterday.
Quote, we're #1 in law enforcement agents getting killed in the United States. We're #1.
We're #1. 20% of the law enforcement officers who've been killed in the line of duty are from Louisiana, and that was before yesterday's episode in Sunset. So it's epidemic, and it's concerning, and you see what happens with the TV reporter in Virginia. I mean, these acts that are seemingly random, and one seems to create yet another one with almost copycat kind of things.
I was saying
although some of them are obviously related to criminal conduct. The guy the situation in Lake Charles, it seems like, at least the allegations are going to be, is that the shooter was involved in a homicide with his roommate and then was on the interstate, and here comes a trooper to try and help him, and he probably thinks he's being tracked down, and he shoots the trooper. I mean, these random acts are horrible, but mental health is at the root of a lot of the problems, and a lot of the shootings and a lot of the problems we see, gun-related violence in Louisiana, is often tied to drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and domestic violence. And those are three major areas that we really ought to focus on a lot. And domestic violence has been a big area of concern for me dating back to my days in the legislature. But also at the root of it are mental health issues, and people who have challenges with alcohol and drugs, or people who have mental issues that go untreated or even undiagnosed. And I was in a meeting several weeks ago in Baton Rouge with the district attorney, a representative of the sheriff and the city police department, and several social workers and a psychologist, talking about the need to develop a mechanism for law enforcement officers to have some basic evaluative knowledge about people when they arrest them for some non-violent offense. Because what usually happens is the officer can't wait to unload this guy in jail and get on to more pressing matters. And oftentimes folks who are incarcerated for drug offenses or minor offenses that don't involve violent conduct wind up in jail. They don't make bail. They're part of now the penal system, which is hugely expensive. And we're not doing a service to the community or to the person by not trying to have a mechanism to evaluate someone and be able to then provide some treatment and some prevention mechanisms for people who have these problems. And it has not been a focus in Louisiana. It's going to be a focus in Louisiana under my administration.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. It's good news for many of our listeners as well. You know, a lot of these people are slipping through the cracks. You just mentioned these officers stopping somebody and they don't know who they're stopping. You know, it reminds me of a psychiatrist that I did my psychiatry rotation and asked me if I wanted to do this. And I said, man, so I'd be on the other side of the line.
Right.
If I've worked around these. You know, it's a very frightening situation. But he told me one thing and I remembered it, and he was right. He said, these people are everywhere.
They are.
You're going to see them everywhere.
Yeah.
And by gosh, you know, the guy in the theater, that was his issue. He was in a mental institution. They had let him loose, turned him free, or released him too early, and did not get proper treatment. And here again, we failed.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's a failure of society and of the healthcare delivery system and of government in some respects. I mean, people don't have symptoms written all over them necessarily when they have mental health problems. They didn't say, I've got a mental health issue, please help.
It's not apparent.
And you know, you've got to try and foresee these kind of problems. And a lot of these gun episodes are calling attention to this. And I think more people are going to start talking about it. You also mentioned about guns. I don't believe the answer is to restrict access to firearms. I believe that people have a right to bear arms and a right to defend themselves if they're attacked. And I think there are a lot of people in this country right now that feel secure knowing that they have firearms available to them. So I hope and I don't think the reaction is going to be politicized, as it's continually been done by the president in every episode talking about the need for gun control, and I don't think that's the answer.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I appreciate your point. You're considered a reformer. You know, you're widely considered as a reformer. You've been involved at all levels in state policy matters for many years. What's the biggest disconnect for policymakers when it comes down to deciding the health care policy?
Well, I think a lot of times legislators aren't particular experts on a lot of the things that we've had to vote for. I was there for 15 years, and that doesn't mean when you get elected you suddenly are an expert on various fields that you're called upon to vote on. So like everything else, it's an educational process. It's for policymakers to get down in the weeds and be willing to learn and open to learning, and perhaps opening to change their preconceived notion about a challenge that they're trying to face as a policymaker. And the healthcare field is changing so rapidly and it gets so confusing. I spoke not too long ago to a group of healthcare professionals and said, one of the biggest disconnects for me is every time you get a medical bill, you have this astronomical amount of money, relatively speaking, that you're being charged for the service. And then your explanation of benefits comes, and there's this amount of money that's actually being charged by the physician, there's this amount of money that's actually being paid by the insurance company. We don't have truth in pricing when it comes to the healthcare industry. And one of the things we might ought to think about as we go through this discussion of healthcare is, let's talk about what the real cost is and the real charge is, and what the real exposure that an individual is going to have and the real amount that an insurance company is going to have, because one of the biggest challenges are kind of the hidden costs when someone finally gets a bill after the insurance has paid it. And there are a lot of charges. I never saw an anesthesiologist, or I never saw this person in the room when I had my treatment. Well, no, you didn't, but you were knocked out at the time, and they had a role, and all of a sudden you get the bill from them. You get the bill for the balance billing, as it's called. Right. And that's related to all the discussion we'll have, and I'm sure we'll visit about this in a minute, with the Affordable Care Act and where it's taking us, and how it is potentially creating more opportunities for health care, but also potentially challenges for business and job loss for citizens.
Correct. Well, it leads me to our next question on, the increase in service and health care coverage, specifically about elderly population, which is growing ever larger and larger, the baby boomers. This large population in Louisiana. What about the elderly in healthcare?
Not only in healthcare, but just in general, the AARP is very active in its lobbying efforts on behalf of the elderly, although they started about 50, which I was a little taken aback when I got an invitation to join AARP at about age 50.
Yeah.
But I'm also learning now, and I talk about this because we try and lure retirees to Louisiana. That's one of my challenges as Lieutenant Governor, that I can speak with some authority when I say that the 60-year-old of today is nothing like the 60-year-old of a generation ago. We're living longer, we're more active as we get older, we have higher expectations for exercise opportunities and recreational activities, cultural events, and so on. And so the AARP is a very vocal proponent of issues related to the elderly, as are councils on aging all across the state. They've been very concerned because the elderly population in Louisiana is under the Department of Health and Hospitals, and advocates believe they've gotten lost there. And I believe, and they wanted them to have an entire Department of Government for elderly affairs. And one of the things I want to do is combine the Department of Veterans Affairs with the Office of Elderly Affairs and create the Department of Veterans and Elderly Affairs, because a lot of vets, the vast majority of them, are over 60. Not all of them are, of course, but there's similar challenges and similar problems. And the same is true with aging populations families who are struggling with what to do with an elderly parent or a disabled adult who may not be able to care for themselves. And so a debate rages over caring for people at home, moving them to intermediate facilities or assisted living facilities, and ultimately moving them to nursing homes. And all of those providers have a role in the healthcare system. And I think what most people want is the flexibility to be able to decide what's most appropriate, what's most affordable for me or for my loved one to be able to make that decision. And that is a big policy challenge that the legislature continually faces in the debate that takes place between these different providers who all want to make sure they get a piece of the action in providing this care. But as the baby boomer generation ages, us more, when we get older, we're going to provide an awful lot of fodder for all those providers. There's going to be a lot to go around because many of us are reaching that age over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. So it's going to be an ongoing challenge for government to deal with that.
It's an ever-growing population, of course. Your views on the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare?
I'm not a supporter of the Affordable Care Act. I think it was an overreach by government that in the long term is not going to be good for the nation or for the healthcare populace of the state. Right now it's the law, though, and we have to see what happens with the congressional elections, the presidential elections, and see if the worm turns and people still talking about the repeal or the repeal and reform or recreating a healthcare program. But for now, it is the law, and it's being put into place. Louisiana, in my view, did not make a concerted or appropriate effort to review the propriety of taking that money. The governor made it very clear from the outset he wasn't taking it.
Correct,
and we know that he's made a political issue out of that, and he's maintained his intransigence of even considering it. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm not prepared to take the Medicaid money immediately walking in the door, because I think there's some potential risk to the state down the road if the feds don't do what they say they're going to do, and with the absence of some kind of control at the local level. I'm going to have a task force appointed of healthcare professionals, people who are providers, people who are experts within DHH, people who are experts in the healthcare delivery system and the health insurance industry, and charge them in a very concise period of time, 30 to 45 days. Bring me back a proposal that we can take to CMS, the government agency that has oversight of Medicaid, to draft a waiver that makes sense for Louisiana. And I want it to have two major components. We've got to be protected on the back end in case the feds don't give us what they say they're going to give us, and we've got to have the flexibility that we do not now have to use that money in a way that accommodates this new healthcare delivery system we've created that is based on providing care to the indigent population. What we've just talked about, the CEAs, the cooperative endeavor agreements that exist between private hospitals and the state, the desire to be able to provide preventive care for the indigent population, to avoid people constantly running to the emergency room where it's so much more expensive and where hospitals are required by law to take you in, and where we don't have a real mechanism to triage those people and send them to places for more modest care than they need. That's got to all be a part of this factor, and paying physicians, frankly, reasonably so that they're willing to take Medicaid patients, because a number of doctors who are saying, I'm not going to take Medicaid because it doesn't even cover my costs. All that rolls into the flexibility that I say we need.
When you're getting into my area of where, everybody's squawking, and I have to speak out because they will tell me, I will hear something after this program. But, physicians' fees are getting cut. And the patient you have to spend the most time with is that Medicare patient,
Or the Medicaid.
Or the Medicaid,
yeah.
and you're getting very little. And these are the people that come in with the big bags of medicine, and all these pharmaceutical agents. And you really have to kind of sort all this out with these people. They have chronic diseases and have multiple major issues. As we get older, look, things, go bad and break.
Well, and you mentioned the chronic disease issue, which is huge for Louisiana with an unusually large diabetic population, which creates so many other manifestations. And I understand, I have it in my family as well, and we're dealing with that. And a lot of times, particularly with the Medicaid population, there is no coordination of care. And there's no evaluation of what one medicine is doing, what the other is doing to countervail what you're trying to do.
I know you've seen doctors prescribe one medicine, and they'll go to the next doctor, and he's not on the same page with that doctor, and they'll put something into the mix, and all of a sudden you've got a patient on multiple drugs that start to interact, and you've got another problem aside from the chronic disease that they're dealing with. And then diabetes, it's epidemic throughout the country, and we're bad, and well, especially in Louisiana, our obesity level is high. I'm a spokesperson here. I've got to speak up, Lieutenant Governor. My show is about motivating people to be healthy. That's my passion, okay, to spread the word, the faith, so to speak, and get that message out there, because good health pays big dividends.
Yes,
and
it does.
I had a professor in medicine, awesome, brilliant doctor. He says, you're going to pay me now or pay me later. And I should say, what a smug remark. But he's right.
Yep.
Either you're going to pay for health care one way or the other. And you're either going to pay for it from the prevention standpoint and take care of yourself and make the sacrifice and eat the good diet, or you're going to pay your doctor. When eventually, there's a price to pay for health.
Yep.
It's cheaper when we take care of ourselves and eat the right diet and don't become overweight, and don't let these. But sometimes diabetes is a genetic predisposition in families, but a lot of it is tied in, type 2 diabetes tied into obesity, letting your body weight get a little bit up, And so, and the doctors are squawking. Of course, everybody's feeling in their pocketbook because their reimbursement schedule, they're getting less and less money.
Right.
Medicare hardly pays, physicians' fees, very much of their fees. And like I said, these are the people, the patients with the big problems. You have to spend that time with that patient. You have to go through all these drugs, and so he's losing money. And so they don't want to take that Medicare patient or Medicaid patient because these panels come in, and they're paid according to how much they find wrong in that practice. And he might have made an oversight, an honest mistake. And these people are charged with health fraud, and then if you're charged with health fraud, it's a felony, you're out of practice, you're out of business. That's a big issue and concern with my medical colleague people.
Well, and we don't want to discourage bright young people from going into the medical profession.
And that's the other end. I heard that, people, hey, why go into medicine? Like, it costs this much to go through medical school. You're going to end up with this type of student loan. And then can you pay off your student loan? Will you make enough in practice with these type of dynamics? Right. And does the government have a place to run medicine in our country? Look what happened to the post office.
Yeah.
That's right. kind of a prime example. I had to bring that up, Lieutenant Governor. That wasn't a sucker punch.
Well, while we're talking about passions, here we are. We promote one of our great passions in Louisiana, which is our food. Everybody loves our food, and obviously, a lot of what we love and a lot of what we're spoiled on, a lot of what we crave in Louisiana are not the most healthy of all foods. And so you've got to strike that balance between enjoying the richness of the Louisiana kitchen at the same time being cognizant of the fact that you got to take care of your health and eat the right things.
I'm 100% with you. People say, well, you know, you're just into all this health stuff. Do you like crawfish etouffee and all this? I said, look, I love all that food, and I do eat it, and I enjoy it. And it's a splurge when I have it. But I go back to that regimen of a very healthy diet for the other 6 days out the week.
Yep.
You know, I may take a day off from, you know, the total healthy diet and may have a little bit, you know, crawfish etouffee, jambalaya, whatever. I mean, it's great food, you know, and it's what we produce here, and we're the best at it. So, yeah, it's hard not to...
Well, you were touting the virtues of green tea to me just before we went on the air, and I understand that.
Yeah, true. That's something I really love and I believe in, because all the studies, there's a reduction in all cancers by 50% using green tea. And as well, you know, the broccolis and the cruciferous vegetables and all those things. So we need to eat better in the state. And as we get older, you know, I think it's the closest thing to a fountain of youth. I think I mentioned that, you know, if you exercise and eat the right diet, you know, you can maintain your health and your vitality and your strength as well. And we talked about the old power lifters. Yeah. The professor in Baton Rouge, who's 84 and still competes in powerlifting meets. You know, what a spirit. And, if all of our aging population were into fitness to that degree, we wouldn't be talking a lot of these issues here at this point in time. But, you know, that's a minority. I spread the word to get healthy, to be fit, to exercise, and to bring down some of this cost. But, you know, but we'll feel better as an end result. But I can't help but because I have you here and ask you this question. It's off the health issue, but the oil industry for our state. I mean, how can I not ask you about the oil industry? What do you see in the future for Louisiana in production, natural gas? Where do you see us as a player in that area?
Well, we're a major player, and we're always going to be. And the cyclical nature of oil and gas prices is obviously something that's challenged Southwest Louisiana as long as the industry has existed. True. And it's going to continue to. There's no question it will, because the price has a direct bearing on jobs and on profit margins for big companies and small companies operating in this state. It looks like it's a factor for us in state government, because every time the price of oil drops $1, it cost the state $12 million. So you can do the math of where oil started, for example, last year and where it wound up, and just do the math and see how dramatically it affects the state budget. I think you're going to see the price of oil come back to some extent, but never anywhere near in the near future where it's been in the 90s and over $100 a barrel. Last year, for example, the Revenue Estimating Conference pegged the price of oil somewhere in the 80s. I don't remember the exact number. When they did that, oil was over $100 a barrel. But when it dropped so precipitously to the 40s, and as it did almost 30s, I guess, you see the state budget was planning on oil at that dollar, and it didn't happen. Same thing is happening as we speak, because it was a relatively conservative estimate this year. I think in the 40s was the estimate, if I'm not mistaken, but it's now showing it dropping potentially even below that. And I'm not positive about that number, but I know that it was a conservative estimate for this fiscal year that just began July 1, but it's already being threatened because the price continues to drop. But we're blessed in this state. We're blessed with the natural resources of oil and gas and timber and great products that America needs and wants. And it constantly creates opportunities for us in this state. And the price of natural gas has now become a major issue for Louisiana because of the natural gas fields that exist and our ability to move that natural gas from northwest Louisiana down here to southwest Louisiana. So you see huge economic expansion projects from Cameron headed east that are going to represent billions of dollars in development in the next 5 to 10 years. And instead of bringing in liquefied natural gas and converting it into CNG, we're taking natural gas and converting it to LNG and shipping it to the rest of the world that needs it. So great opportunities for us.
Big plants in Lake Charles.
Huge plants in Lake
To
Charles.
contribute to just what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
and that's the biggest boom area that we're seeing in the state right now, and it is going to continue. And I mentioned timber because timber is the largest agricultural crop in the state. You don't think about it as being a crop, but
Correct.
obviously it is.
Yeah.
And so we're very dependent as an industry on homes and building and construction projects, but also now we're finding that industry is finding another use for those wood pellets, and they're creating these wood pellets out of wood that otherwise wasn't being used in big storage facilities in Baton Rouge now that are being shipped overseas to Europe, where there is a need for unconventional or new forms of energy, where they're not looking for the traditional energy we provided, they're looking for other sources, and that's one of them. So we're always going to be an energy-dependent
Correct.
State,
Correct.
and it's
But
a
we
big
have
part
other-
of our economy.
But that's not the only thing.
It's
we
not
have
the,
going
it's not
for
the
us.
only thing. That's right.
Correct. That's good news. Yeah, I agree with you. The election is October the 24th.
It is.
I want to ask, anything that you would like to bring out this time on this show that I haven't asked you already?
Well,
Lots of questions,
you open that door and I'll walk in.
Go ahead.
Out of
I wanna
the
hear that.
candidates that have offered themselves right now, there are 4 of us, and nobody has the breadth and depth of experience that I've had in government at the local government level on the Baton Rouge Council, 15 years in the state Senate, chairing the Finance Committee and vice chair for a total of 8 years. So I've balanced these state budgets and understand the dynamics of negotiations with legislators, setting priorities, and we have not set priorities adequately in this state at all. And that's one of the things I talk about, in the need to really say, if higher education is the most important thing going for our state right now, which I believe it is, we better fund it adequately as a priority and not as a last thing if we get a little extra money floating around. And I'm the only candidate who's run 2 departments of state government with literally hundreds and hundreds of employees and millions of dollars, and having far less employees and far less money than any of my predecessors, and leaving each of these places better than I found it. So I think from an experience level, and a person who has been effective throughout their life, and a person who has the ability and the reputation for bringing people together and not splitting us apart, is very critical right now. We're frustrated in Louisiana with the governor's absence and the governor's focus on his own political agenda instead of ours, and my focus will obviously be entirely on Louisiana, with an eye toward bringing us together, and not just Republicans, but Republicans and Democrats and no-party individuals, and blacks and whites and Northerners and Southerners. We need a leader who is going to bring us together and chart a course for our future 25 to 50 years from now, not just next election cycle. And that's what I feel like I'm prepared to do, and I've prepared my whole life to do, and I'm looking very much forward to that challenge.
I've got another question while you were talking about the timber and everything. I've got a lot of friends that are big duck hunters. And I've got to mention this question, or I'm going to catch it from them. The wetlands, preservation of our wetlands, of our coastal. Can you tell us something about that?
No greater and more pressing long-term and expensive challenge that we have in Louisiana than making sure that we save and preserve America's wetland. It's not just the Louisiana coast, it's America's wetland.
Right.
It's what enables us to get this oil and gas out of here to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. It's what enables us to produce and catch the finest seafood in America that America and the world craves. And it's given us the opportunity to have this magnificent port system that we have all along our coast to move product, not just for Louisiana, but for the entire state. So we talk about saving America's wetland. It's about saving the prosperity of Louisiana and protecting the cultural diversity of this state and the generations of people who have made their life and their living in the swamps and marshland of Louisiana.
Cajuns.
Not to mention
Cajuns.
the hunting. That the Mississippi enters the Gulf through only one state, and it's ours. And that flyaway for migratory birds comes directly over Louisiana every year, and it creates this wonderful fertile land that we have, and this great atmosphere to enjoy recreational fishing and hunting, not only for our Louisianians, but visitors who come to our state who are here just to take advantage of that.
The sportsman's paradise.
That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Lieutenant Governor, I want to wish you the very best in this upcoming election.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for taking your time to come on the show.
Good
A
to be
very
with you.
personable person, a very people person here. Folks, I want to thank you for tuning in today to my program, It's Your Health, and with my special guest, Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardon. Thank you for tuning in, and Hope you tune in next week for our next show. God bless you. Have a pleasant evening. I'm Dr. Rick Duplantis.